found the names to avoid: Margaret, David, Linda, Tom. I'll create entirely new characters. I found the envelope on a Tuesday. That detail probably shouldn't matter, but it does. Tuesday. The recycling bin was already at the curb. I remember because I almost didn't check the mailbox. I thought I'd already brought everything in the day before, but something made me stop. Maybe I saw the corner of it sticking out. Maybe I just had one of those feelings you get when you've lived long enough to recognize them. I stood there on the front porch in my cardigan and read it twice. Mr. and Mrs. Jason Calloway. That was all. No, and family. No, and Patricia. Just Mr. and Mrs. Jason Calloway in that looping gold script that brides spend weeks choosing. And for a moment, I genuinely thought there had been a mistake, a typo, something. Because I am Jason's mother. I am the woman who drove him to his first Little League practice and sat through every fever and held him while he cried after his father left when he was 11 years old. And my name was not on that envelope. I set it on the kitchen counter and made myself a cup of coffee before I did anything else. That's something I learned in my 60s that I wish I'd known in my 40s. When something hits you that hard, you stop, you breathe, you make the coffee. Because whatever you do in the first 5 minutes of feeling blindsided, you will regret. The coffee was too hot. I drank it anyway. My name is Patricia. I'm 68 years old. I live in the same house in Dayton, Ohio that I moved into with my husband 31 years ago, and where I stayed after he decided he wanted a different life with a woman from his accounting firm. I raised Jason in this house. I taught him to ride his bike in this driveway. I sat at that same kitchen counter helping him with algebra homework and college applications, and later, listening to him talk about a woman named Renee. He met Renee at a work conference in Columbus about 2.5 years ago. She works in corporate HR. She's 34, which is fine. She's organized, which is also fine. She has opinions about how things should be done, which is, and I want to be fair here, also fine. People are allowed to have opinions. What I noticed, slowly and then all at once, the way these things happen, was that Jason started having the same opinions. Not similar ones. The same ones. Word for word, sometimes. Like the time he called to tell me that he thought it might be better if I didn't come to their apartment for Christmas that year because they were trying to establish their own traditions. I asked him what that meant. He said he'd have to call me back. He never did call back about that. We ended up having Christmas at my sister's house in Kettering, and I told myself it was fine. It wasn't fine, but I told myself it was. Then came the engagement. I heard about it on a Wednesday morning when Jason sent a group text that included me, his aunt, 2 cousins, and apparently several work colleagues. A group text. I found out my son was engaged the same way I find out when a restaurant I follow changes its hours. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then I typed, "Congratulations, I love you both," and put the phone face down on the coffee table. My sister called 10 minutes later. She said, "Did you know?" I said, "I found out just now." She went quiet in a way that meant she understood everything I wasn't saying. Over the next several months, I tried. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to tell this story in a way that makes me sound like I sat back and waited to be wronged. I didn't. I offered to help with the planning. I asked Renee about the venue, the colors, the flowers. She answered in short sentences, the kind that are technically polite but leave no room for follow-up. I offered to host an engagement party. Jason said they were keeping things small. 3 weeks later, my cousin showed me photos on Facebook from an engagement party at Renee's parents' country club outside Cincinnati. 40 people. Open bar. A photo booth. I went to bed that night and looked at the ceiling for a long time. And then, 6 weeks before the wedding, I found the envelope. I called Jason that evening. He answered on the 4th ring, which he never used to do. He used to pick up immediately when I called. The way kids do when they still think of their mother as a first responder. 4th ring. I heard background noise and then it went quiet, like he'd stepped into another room. I told him I'd gotten the invitation. I kept my voice even. I told him I noticed it was addressed only to his fiancée's family name. I asked if there had been a mistake. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, it was just..." Renee wanted the envelope to match the inner card, and the inner card already had Jason, I said. He stopped. "Is your mother's name anywhere on that invitation?" Another pause. "The inner envelope has +1 for you." I sat with that for a second. +1? My son was getting married, and I was listed as a +1. I said, "Okay, thank you for explaining." And I got off the phone before either of us could say something worse. That night, I thought about what my own mother would have done. She was a practical woman, my mother, a school librarian for 30 years, quiet in a way that people sometimes mistook for passivity until they realized she was just choosing her words carefully. She used to say that the worst thing you can do when someone underestimates you is prove them right by falling apart. I thought about that for a long time. Then I went to my filing cabinet and I pulled out a folder. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It was just a folder, cream-colored, from the office supply store, labeled in my own handwriting. Inside it were documents I'd been keeping since Jason was born, his birth certificate, obviously, but also records of the savings bonds I'd bought him every Christmas from the time he was 3 until he turned 18. The certificates for the education savings account I'd opened in 1989 and contributed to every month on a teacher's salary, which is how Jason finished college without any debt. The records from the refinance I'd done on this house in 2019, when Jason needed help with the deposit on his first apartment after his previous lease fell through unexpectedly. I had co-signed for him. My credit score was attached to his name in ways he may have forgotten about. I wasn't planning to use any of it. I just needed to remember who I was. Sometimes you need to see it on paper. The wedding was on a Saturday in October, outside Cincinnati, at an estate venue that cost, and I'm only mentioning this because it's relevant, roughly what I spent on a year of Jason's college tuition. I drove myself. I wore the burgundy dress I'd bought in August, which I tried on 3 times before purchasing, because I wanted to be sure I felt like myself in it, not invisible, myself. The ceremony was beautiful. I will give them that without any reservation. The light was right and the music was right, and when I saw Jason at the end of the aisle, I felt the same thing I felt the first time I held him. That particular love that doesn't have a good word in English, the one that is bigger than anything else you will ever feel. I cried. Of course I cried. What happened afterward is where things got complicated. At the reception, the seating chart had me at a table near the back corner, table 11. The venue had 14 tables. Renee's parents were at table 1, obviously. Her grandmother was at table 2. Her college friends were at tables 3 and 4. Jason's 2 best friends from childhood, men who had grown up in and out of this house, who had eaten at my kitchen table for years. They were at table 6. I was at table 11 with a coworker of Renee's I'd never met, an older couple from Renee's mother's church, and 2 people who turned out to be the venue coordinator's family members filling empty seats. I found this out during the salad course when the man next to me explained why he looked slightly confused about the centerpiece. I ate my salad. I smiled. The music was good. During the cocktail hour, before we sat down, Renee's mother found me near the appetizer table and said, and I want to be precise about her phrasing, "Patricia, it's so wonderful that you could make it." Like I was a neighbor who'd swung by. Like I was someone who had been squeezed in as a favor. I wouldn't have missed it, I said, which was true. And I smiled and she moved on, and I picked up a stuffed mushroom and ate it by myself near the window that looked out over the garden. Here is what nobody tells you about this particular kind of hurt. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a clear moment where someone says something obviously cruel that you can point to later. It comes in table numbers and envelope addresses and, "I'm so glad you could make it," and the space where your name should have been. It accumulates, and you stand there, by a window, holding a stuffed mushroom, and you understand, clearly and without drama, that someone has been working very steadily to make you small, and your son has been letting it happen. There was a moment during the reception, between the toast and the first dance, when Jason came to find me. He sat down in the empty chair next to me at table 11, and he looked tired in a way I recognized. He looked the way he used to look in high school when he'd done something he knew wasn't right and hadn't figured out yet how to address it. He said, "You okay, Mom?" I said, "I'm fine, sweetheart. She's beautiful. You did good." He smiled, and it was real, and for a moment he was 22 again, and we were just the 2 of us, the way we'd been for most of his life. Then someone called his name from across the room, and he stood up and patted my shoulder and went back. I sat at table 11 for another 40 minutes. Then I got my coat. I didn't make a scene. I found Jason near the bar and I hugged him and I said the wedding was beautiful and I loved him. He said he'd call me when they got back from the honeymoon. I said he'd call me when they got back from the honeymoon. I said I'd look forward to it. I kissed his cheek and I walked to my car and I drove home on I-75 with the radio off. That was 6 weeks ago. He didn't call. I don't say that with bitterness, or at least I'm trying not to. I say it because it matters, because there's a difference between someone who forgets and someone who doesn't quite get around to it. I know my son. He didn't forget. He just didn't quite get there. And every week that went by, I thought he would, and every week he didn't. Something shifted in me slowly and then faster, like ice starting to give in March. 3 weeks after the wedding, I made a decision. I got out the folder again. I wasn't angry. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have made this easier in some ways and harder in others. What I felt was clear, cleaner than anger. I felt like a woman who had been standing at a door, waiting to be let in for 2 years, and had finally understood that she was the one holding the key. I made some phone calls. I spoke to the woman at my bank. I spoke to my financial advisor, a woman named Carol, who has been managing my accounts for 14 years, and who, when I explained the situation, was quiet for exactly 3 seconds, and then said, "What would you like to do?" I love Carol for many reasons, but mostly for that. I'm not going to detail every step here, because some of it is still in process. But I will tell you that I removed Jason as beneficiary from 2 accounts. I updated my estate documents, which I had been meaning to do for 3 years and kept putting off the way you put off things you hope you'll never need. I called my attorney, a man named Gerald who handled my divorce and who charges $285 an hour and has always been worth it. And I had a conversation about the cosign on Jason's old apartment, which has since been resolved, thankfully, and about what documentation I should keep going forward. None of this was revenge. I need to say that clearly. I wasn't doing it to punish anyone. I was doing it because I had spent 2 years making myself smaller in order to stay in my son's life. And what I got in return was a table in the back corner and my name missing from an envelope. And somewhere during that 6 week silence, I understood that I had been operating under the assumption that love required me to accept whatever was offered. That assumption was wrong. I also rearranged my guest room. This sounds small. It isn't. For the 2 years Jason and Renee had been together, I had kept that room in a particular way. Fresh towels, the good pillows, the lamp on the left side of the bed that Jason has always preferred. Ready. Hoping. I moved the furniture. I put the sewing machine back in there, the one I've been meaning to use for 2 years. I bought a comfortable chair for the corner and a small bookshelf. I made it mine again. That Saturday morning, I called my sister and we drove out to Yellow Springs for the day. We had lunch at a place that only takes cash and has the best pie in Ohio. We walked around the shops. She didn't ask me how I was feeling every 10 minutes the way people do when they're worried about you. She just walked next to me and we talked about other things. About her granddaughter and a book she'd read and a documentary about birds she thought I'd like. On the drive home, she said, "Have you heard from him?" "Not yet," I said. "What are you going to say when you do?" I thought about it. The flat fields going by. A water tower. The particular gray of Ohio sky in November. "The truth," I said. "Whatever he asks, I'm going to tell him the truth." She nodded. She understood what that meant. 2 days after that, Jason called. It was a Sunday evening, around 7. I was reading. I let it ring twice. Not to make a point, just because I was finishing a sentence and I've reached the age where I finish sentences. Then I answered. He asked how I was. I said I was. I said I was well. He told me about the honeymoon, which had been in Portugal and sounded genuinely beautiful. I listened. I asked about Lisbon. He told me about the food. Then he went quiet in a way that meant we were getting to it. He said, "Mom, I feel like something is off between us." I said, "Jason, sit down if you're standing." A poor standing. A pause. "Okay, I love you," I said. "I have loved you since before you were born, and that is not going to change, and I need you to hear that first before I tell you anything else." "Okay," he said again, quieter. "I felt invisible at your wedding," I said. "Not hurt, exactly. Invisible. And I've been invisible for a while now. And I've been allowing it because I thought that was the price of staying in your life. But I've realized that's not a price I should have to pay." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know," and stopped. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's also something we need to talk about. We talked for a long time. Not everything got resolved. That's not how real conversations work, and I'm too old to expect a single phone call to close what 2 years opened. But he listened in the way he used to listen when he was young, before he learned to defend himself before he understood. He apologized for not calling sooner. I told him the apology mattered, but that I needed to see it in the way things worked going forward, not just in the words. He said Renee hadn't meant to make me feel excluded. I said, Jason, I know you believe that. He heard what I wasn't saying. He's still my son, underneath all of it. He heard it. I don't know exactly what comes next. I'm not naive enough to think one conversation rebuilds a house. But I knew this. I am not willing to disappear in order to belong somewhere. I have spent 31 years in this house. I have paid my own mortgage, raised my own child, survived my own marriage and its ending. I am not a plus one. I made myself another cup of coffee after we hung up. This time I let it cool a little before I drank it. I sat at the kitchen counter where I've sat 10,000 times, in the house I've kept for 31 years, and outside the window the street was quiet and the evening was coming down cold and steady over Dayton like it does every November. I was still here. That mattered. It turns out, and I know this sounds simple, but simple things have a way of taking decades to actually understand. It turns out the respect you don't ask for is the only kind worth having. Not the kind you negotiate for, or earn by making yourself convenient, or hold on to by pretending not to see the things you see. The kind that comes from knowing, plainly and without performance, who you are. I know who I am. I'm Patricia. I'm 68. I raised a good man, even if he still has some things to learn. And I am nobody's afterthought. Not anymore. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just in the quiet, honest way you think about things when you're 68 and the house is still at night and you have the time to actually follow a thread back to where it started. What happened to me didn't begin with an envelope. It began the first time I let something slide because I didn't want to cause trouble. The first time I typed, "Congratulations, I love you both," when what I actually felt was grief. The first time I kept the guest room ready for people who weren't coming, as if the readiness itself could substitute for the relationship. I was operating on a logic that said, if I make myself easy enough, convenient enough, small enough, I will be loved in return. What I didn't understand then, and what I understand now, is that that logic teaches people exactly how to treat you. That's not blame. That's just cause and effect. Jason is not a bad person. Renee is not a villain. But I created a set of conditions where my absence of boundaries read as an absence of needs. And people, even people who love you, will fill the space you leave them with whatever is most convenient for them. That's not cruelty. That's just human nature when it goes unchecked. What I had to learn, and this took me longer than I'd like to admit, is that dignity is not something you protect by staying quiet. Dignity is something you practice. Every time I accepted a table in the back corner without saying anything, I practiced smallness. Every time I refreshed those guest room pillows for people who didn't call, I practiced waiting. And you get good at what you practice. By the time that envelope arrived, I had become very good at making myself invisible. The decision to stop was not dramatic. I didn't have a breakdown or a revelation. I just pulled out a folder and looked at the facts of my own life laid out on paper, and I thought, this is who I am, and I am not a plus one. What followed? The phone calls to Carol, the conversation with Gerald, the rearranged guest room, the drive to Yellow Springs with my sister. None of it was revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think people sometimes confuse self-respect with retaliation. They are not the same thing. Retaliation is about the other person. What I did was entirely about me. I was simply choosing, at 68, to stop practicing smallness and start practicing something else. When Jason finally called, I told him the truth, not to punish him, because telling the truth was the only thing left that made sense. And here's what I've come to understand about honesty. It is an act of respect, both for the person you're speaking to and for yourself. When I stopped pretending everything was fine, I gave Jason the chance to actually respond to something real. You can't repair what nobody will name. I don't know exactly where things go from here, but I know that I am still in this house, still drinking my coffee in the morning, still myself. And that turns out to be enough of a foundation to build from. Not because everything is resolved, it isn't, but because I am no longer waiting for someone else's behavior to determine my worth. That was the thing I needed to change, not Jason, not Renee. That belief in me, that I had to earn my place in my own son's life. I didn't. I never did. I just forgot that for a while.